Welcome to a new series which is effectively a reimagining of an old series. We're going to go through a custom origin every single week rather than every goddamn day like I used to. This week's origin is the North Star origin, created by the Discord user known as Epic Keycraft. Let's get into it. The North Star origin is a 3-impact origin. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Now I think the big thing to put in mind initially is whenever you select this origin for the first time, you'll be also guided to pick a certain Aegis upgrade. We'll go through the Aegis upgrades that you have options to a little bit later, but this is also a big thing to keep in mind when you first select this origin. Our first main ability, because there's 2 attached to the G button, is Cluster Missile. Shoot a cluster missile which has a great chance to create multiple continuous explosions on impact and pull enemies towards them. Sneaking is required to use this ability. This is basically a cluster bomb in Minecraft, as if it successfully lands a hit on any form of enemy mob, it will start a chain reaction of explosions that will trail along a direction. It's not really specific what direction it's going to end up going, and if you're too close to this cluster bomb when it does go off, it will pull you along with it, and if you're in survival mode, it will also kill you because you're not immune to the explosions that it's putting out. Either way, it could be a buttload of fun, especially if you keep your distance from this mess, because it can cause a lot of mess, and it can easily deal with waves upon waves of very weak mobs. It can't really deal with strong mobs, as you can see here. Even some husks are actually surviving through the chain of explosions that go through with this ability. Either way though, it's a very cool ability that will go off, that when goes off is very beautiful. Your other main ability attached to the G is Multi-Target Missile System. Shoot a burst of 7 inaccurate rockets in the direction of enemies. You can't use this ability while sneaking. So yes, that means the previous ability is your primary ability key whilst you're sneaking, and this ability is just your primary ability key when you're not sneaking. That's a very specific thing that you need to keep in mind when you use any of the missile systems. Basically, whenever you lose this ability, it will shoot the rockets or the fireballs roughly in the direction you're looking. Basically, the closer the target is to you, the more accurate this ability is going to be. Think about it as in like burst rounds in a shotgun, how as you get further away from where the shotgun shot it from, it will just split into multiple smaller pieces going further and further away from the central target. And this is kind of how this is going to work here. It will continue to spread in random-ish directions, roughly on target to where you're directing it, but the further away your target is, the less likely the missile's even going to make it to the target, let alone hit the target and deal damage. So this is a really good close-up weapon beast, but at the same time, you will take knockback damage from this if it's too close. So it's kind of like finding the balance between how close is too close for you to be affected by the missiles, where you'll also successfully deal a lot of damage to the target that you're trying to shoot them at. Next is Hover. You're completely immune to fall damage. That one's pretty self-explanatory. Fall damage means absolutely nothing to you. Fall from whatever height you want to. Life Sashes. You have 4 less hearts. Again, self-explanatory. You have 6 hearts rather than the usual 10. Nothing more. Your secondary ability is Viper Thrusters. You can switch to a flying mode with your secondary key, which drains your fuel, but gives you creative flight for the period of time you have fuel. You can refuel by landing on the ground and not flying. Now, there's one distinct problem with this ability here. The fuel bar does not function. So effectively, you can just infinitely fly in creative mode, which will break this origin for a lot of people. There is just ways to just simply ignore the creative flight or just barely use it, but I feel like that just this being broken in the way that it currently is just makes this origin a lot less usable. Probably a way I would personally change it is to make it so that you have elytra wings instead, but you have a propulsion that is based upon a fuel that you can use to boost yourself up into the air. Kind of similar to how you have the elytron boost, but rather than it being one massive boost you use it once, you can slowly burn the boost to propel yourself forward. Kind of similar nature to that. Either way, at this current point, this ability in particular is broken. You may as well disable it or just not use it whatsoever. Funny thing though, you can still get caught in your own explosions even whilst flying. Titan Scale. You're 20% taller than others due to you being a Titan, but your flight speed is also increased by 20%. Basically, you're just barely less than 2.5 blocks worth of height, which means that you can just crouch to get underneath a 2-block high gap. You can fit underneath a 2.5 block gap, which is 2 blocks and a slab. Basically, you're kind of taller, but it's not game-breakingly taller, you know? Need for mobility, you cannot wear any heavy armor with protection values higher than chainmail. This is a pretty decent restriction considering that you easily can take damage from your own explosives, which does mean you want to have blast protection on most of your armor, but you can't even have that good of an armor set in the first place because, well, that would just be too broken. Let's ignore the fact you've got infinite flight anyway. Unwieldy, the way your hands are formed provide no way of holding a shield upright, self-explanatory, you can't use a shield. Large appetite, you exhaust much quicker than others, thus requiring you to eat more. This is another big thing of notice, you will exhaust yourself a lot quicker, but a big thing to note is that flying around doesn't really exhaust too much hunger unless you're like sprint flying, then you might see some hunger drain, but not really much, doesn't seem to really do much, but you still exhaust a lot quicker than normal, so another thing to keep in mind. Now the fun part, the Aegis upgrades. Lets you choose one of 6 different upgrades that slightly increase your performance or abilities. Let's run through these buffs. Twin Cluster is the first one that I've been using the entire video. It fires a second cluster missile right after the first one. This ability does what it says in the box, it just shoots a secondary cluster bomb a few moments after the first one, but be very careful. With this ability, it makes it far easier to get caught in the cluster bomb shenanigans, making it far more likely for you to actually kill yourself. Because the first cluster bomb will start going off before the second one starts to come in, and the cluster bomb one's already going to be slowly trying to suck you back down towards it, and the second one will just go off a little closer to you, or making that one be more likely to pull you in and just get yourself killed. So be very careful when you're playing around with the double cluster bombs because it's very easy for you to get yourself killed with them. Explosive traps. Multi-target missile system shoots more accurate and even more explosive missiles, but they are fired twice as slow and cooldown is twice as long. Again, does exactly what it says in the tin. It pretty much makes it so that, well, the missiles that you're shooting with this are pretty much going to hit where you're trying to direct it. Though another thing to keep in mind is that it's still very easy to get pulled into the explosive knockback if you're just slightly too close. Even like you can see in one of the clips here that I'm just trying to shoot it from a fair bit of a distance and I still get hit by the explosions that were going off as they were shooting them. So it's definitely a massive thing to keep in mind. Shashi's upgrade. You gain an additional 3 hearts and 10 natural armor. Your movement speed and fuel capacity are decreased instead. Yeah, your speed is like massively slowed, like very drastically. Though keep in mind you still have normal air speed, meaning that if you do jump sprinting, you won't really notice the speed decrease that much, but you've just got to keep jumping, otherwise you will slow down heavily, and the fuel decrease in capacity really doesn't mean anything when your fuel doesn't seem to decrease when flying anyway. Flight Core multi-target missile system turns into a lengthy barrage of very inaccurate missiles. This ability can now be used only in the air and the cooldown is thrice as long as before. Your multi-target missile system will now launch about 10 seconds worth of missiles in a pretty decent variant of accuracy, like it's a lot less accurate than what the initial version would be. Again, close-up targets are going to find themselves getting absolutely annihilated, and the cooldown is now like a minute long, so it's very drastic. But I don't know, this one's a little bit less of a reason, like the explosiveness from the ability isn't going to pull you in as much as the previous 2 explosion abilities did. Like it seems to be a lot less effective at doing them, especially considering that you can only use this in the air, but the long cooldown and its very massive inaccuracy at distance definitely leads to a bit of a question on whether this one's worth it or not. Plasma Railgun. Critical hits deal 2 times more damage, but your attack speed is reduced. With this ability, your diamond-based weapons and netherite-based weapons will effectively be one-shot crit hits against a majority of low health enemies. Iron Golems will still put up a bit of a fight, but with a diamond sword you do 21 crit damage, with a netherite sword you do 24 crit damage, and with a Netherite Axe, you do 30 crit damage. Absolutely insane numbers. And you can still 2-shot crit with both an iron and a stone sword against stuff like huts. So basically, this is very useful. Like the speed attack isn't really going to be noticed too much unless you're fighting boss-based mobs that have a stupid amount of health, because the majority of things are going to get one-shot by your critical hits most of the time. VTOL Hover. Attack damage and range are increased while using your thrusters, but the fuel consumption is also increased by 120%. Now you'd think this would be the one you'd go with because fuel consumption doesn't actually function properly with this origin, but genuinely speaking, no. The damage output increase doesn't really seem to do too much when it comes to actual distance. Doesn't really seem to do any form of noticeable increase of damage. The other abilities and upgrades are just far more useful and far more potent in their changes that I would just rather go with them and ignore VTOL Hover as a whole. So overall, this is a pretty fun origin. The flight being kind of broken is definitely a potential issue, but with considering how easy it is to get caught in your own explosions and accidentally kill yourself even whilst flying around, I do think there's still enough downsides. This could be a very fun origin to play around with. It'd help though if the fuel was actually functioning. Either way, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to click this video on screen now for another custom origin. Until next time, bye bye!